Hey guys, Buildzoid here, and I can't believe it. I'm actually doing undervolting on Vega. But, popular request, and, well, with the Frontier Edition ending up dead yesterday, I decided, you know what? That was like a lot of Patreon funds just going up in, well, not smoke, because it was the most anti like that's the sad thing is like a lot of people are like, oh, we should have seen it on camera, the card dying. It's like there was nothing to see. It just stopped booting. It's not exactly exciting, is it? But yeah, so with the card going up in a black screen, I kind of decided, well, I kind of owe everybody one for even being able to kill a card that expensive. So, since everybody's been raving about how I should do an undervolting video, here's your freaking undervolting video. Anyway, before we get to the undervolting, I would like to thank alza.co.uk for providing me with this Vega 64 and also not allowing me to mess with it too much, because that's the only reason why this one's still alive while the other one's dead. But either way, alza.co.uk, for those of you unaware, is a big online retailer for all of Europe and the UK. And they stock a lot of really cool extreme overclocking equipment like LN2 pots, Kingpin cooling thermal paste. They also started recently binning CPUs. And they're just a general sort of computer hardware retailer. And for the UK, they have free shipping, which is kind of cool. And price-wise, they're also really not that bad. Like, I've actually used them because they're better than a lot of local UK retailers. Yeah, so huge thanks to them for providing this card, because with the Frontier Edition that dead, without this one, this video would never happen. But, yeah, let's get right onto the undervolting. So right now what you're seeing is the card is running 3D Mark Firestrike Extreme. I test select, everything is set to default settings. And we have the card here. Before we get into the actual undervolting, I wanted to show people something that I found really funny. So everybody's like, oh yeah, I'm undervolting my Vega by so much. And one thing I noticed with a lot of these undervolting reports from people is like their power consumption isn't going down that much. There's a very simple reason for that. If we measure the V-core on the card, right, you can see the multimeter kind of, right, I'll pick it, yeah, there we go. And then I stab the V-core capacitor bank. Yeah, that's on stock settings. We're under a volt. Because the thing about Vega is that on the stock air cooler, it power throttles and thermal throttles so hard that it ends up running below 1 volt. Also, the power consumption at the wall right now is around 390 watts. Once we undervolt it, it's going to be around 390 watts, which makes sense because our voltage is going to go down a bit, but our frequencies are going to go up. And frequency does cause an increase in power consumption, even though it's less of an increase than the if you increase core voltage by 10%, right? You also get a 10% current draw increase, which leads to a overall, say, 21% increase in power consumption. If you increase frequency by 10%, you'll just roughly get a 10% increase in power consumption. But we're not decreasing core voltage that much, and we will be increasing frequency quite a bit, as you will see that the scores go way higher than this. So, yeah, I'll quickly show you the wall meter. So, that's right there. Nope. So, yeah, it's around 390 right now. And let's get back into Windows. And I'll load up some, and we'll go into some of the more interesting things that the card does. So if you're undervolting your Vega, the best way to do this is to just go from balanced all the way to custom. Actually, you know what? Before we do the undervolting, I'll show you the results. So, saved a few scores here. So, this is the sort of stock settings. This is balanced. And as you can see, we get a overall we get a graphics score of 10,569. Overall score is really not that bad. This is running on a 5.1 gigahertz 7700K, and the memory is, I think, at 4133, 18, 18, 18 right now. can't remember quite what I set the system to, but it's fast. It's really fast. It's also not completely stable. It runs 3D Mark just fine, but I wouldn't put it under any heavier loads. Then here you have, okay, this is one of my overclocking attempts. Yeah, this is like a sort of soft max out. It's not quite like I've managed to get higher scores out of the card than this, but this is pretty much the highest I could sort of bother with setting up for like getting a screenshot of just for the purposes of this video. Here we have this is the turbo setting, which as you can still see, the score kind of sucks. We're still under 11,000. And this is one of my undervolts. This one's not actually stable. This one eventually crashes. I also bumped up, you can see I also bumped up the fan speed because, like, personally, I don't find 2,800 RPM that loud, and that's with the card on an open air test bench sitting, like, pretty much right next to me. So I bumped it up to 2,800. Really not that bad. I kind of got used to 4,900 when I was doing, like, max performance testing earlier, so I'm a little biased here about what classifies as loud, but yeah, I don't really think 2,800 is that bad, and it does help scores a bit. Here we have another undervolt. This time, actually, this one's stable. So this one actually is stable, and you can see there's like basically no difference in the scores. I dropped the core clock ever so small amount, about 20 megahertz. And overall, you'll notice that technically all of these settings are underclocks from the stock settings. This is another undervolt, except this time I dropped 50 megahertz off of the HBM clock because I do know that not all of the Vega cards or not all of the V64s are actually hitting 1100 megahertz like mine is. So for people who have a card not hitting 1100 megahertz, well, this is the difference. There's not much of a difference. The HBM you get really big performance jumps on the first couple, like going from like 945 to 1050, big performance jump. 1050 to 1100, a lot less of a performance jump. So yeah, and then, and that's the last one I have. So let's go and take a look at some of the weirdness in Wattman. So I have it on custom right now. Did I just, yeah, okay, I just enabled custom because everything's still default pretty much. So let's go over how you would go about setting something up. So this voltage control setting under the memory tab here is not actually memory voltage. This is what I like to refer to as core voltage floor, and I'm going to show you what that does just like right now. I'm going to show you. So we're going to set dynamic frequency. So I've also there's another glitch that, like, don't ever set your frequency for your for P6 and P7 to the same thing. This ruins performance, like absolutely ruins performance. I think the reason why is because if you set your frequencies for P6 and P7 the same, what ends up happening is the card gets stuck at this power state, which, like, I don't know what it actually is, but as you can probably tell from the graph, well, it's like less than 1400 megahertz. It's like 1400 megahertz. So yeah, don't set P6 and 7 to the same thing. If you do that, you lose a ton of performance. I think it's a driver bug because you wouldn't really expect it to do that, but it just does that. So don't set both of your P states to the same thing. I think there's a few reviewers out there who made that mistake when doing their overclocking, where they set their P6 and P7 to the same thing. And they're like, oh yeah, undervolting doesn't work at all. Your performance falls off a cliff. Well, your performance is falling off a cliff because you broke the freaking AMD's terrible overclocking utility. So basically, my preferred way of dealing with P state 6 is to not deal with P state 6 at all. And just set it to whatever it was before, which in this case was 1537. Voltage, you set the same thing for both of these. Those don't actually cause a problem. It's the frequency. If you put the same frequency in both of them, then it breaks, but you can set the same voltage for both. So if we set 1100, 1000, 1000, but we have 1050 here, what you're going to notice, and I wonder if GPU-Z is going to show this. Probably not. So we'll just run 3D Mark because I actually tested it under 3D Mark. That was interesting. All right, and I forgot to hit apply. So I just have another loop test of 3D Mark here, and let's go to camera and monitor. Also, the performance drop thing, like, if you don't believe me, because I'm not going to demonstrate it, because running a full round of 3D Mark takes forever. Like, it really doesn't take that long to test that and find out that I'm saying the truth. Like, don't set your P6 and P7 to the same thing. You're going to have a really bad day. So anyway, I just set 1000 millivolts in, and actually I just want to see that the FPS is correct right now. Because I know what it should peak at. Okay, I screwed something up. Oh, I know what I screwed up. Ah, look, yeah, power state's not maxed. Boom. So, max your power limit. Always max your power limit. Don't, temperature target, you don't really want to mess with. For my card, and I imagine for most cards it's going to be like this, the HBM actually doesn't hold stability very well. On this card, above 80 degrees, it crashes. Like, the memory always crashes. Like, well, not even necessarily crashes, but you start getting a lot of artifacting. I believe if I left it running for long enough, it would eventually crash outright. So I like to keep the temperature target at 75 degrees because you might want to bump it up to like 78, but like at 80 or higher, it starts causing serious issues. So definitely not worth it raising that. I'm just going to put the fan speed to 2800. Apply that. And I'll just leave the memory clock at what it is. And let's run custom. Man, this benchmark takes forever to frickin' open. This is on an SSD, so I have no idea why it's taking so long. Anyway, we're in and we're running, and if we measure VCore, which I'm going to be careful, you can see that our VCore is not as low as we're above a volt, right? Which makes 0 sense, because we did just set 1000, and typically, with any kind of, unless you're running some kind of ridiculously high LLC setting on your motherboard or something, you generally, whatever voltage you set, you should be getting less. And the reason for that is the core voltage floor setting, as I called it. So the memory voltage here, this is not memory voltage, it's core voltage floor. Because if we knock this down to 950, right? If we set it to 950, you're going to see something very interesting. So we're just going to run Firestrike Extreme again. All right, and I just changed the memory voltage. And actually, wait, I'm going to put it on the, keep forgetting. See? So 950 for voltage control on the memory stuff. So now let's get that voltage measurement. And now it's going to show under a volt for VCore. Okay, so it's running now. And okay, I'm going to need to stand up again. Up. And I'm not sure that shows up that great. There we go. That's 0.96. Yeah. So now we're actually running at lower core voltage, aren't we? So that causes some issues with the core overclocking. Now, there is a reason why AMD has that voltage labeled as memory. Under certain conditions, too low core voltage on some cards will cause the memory to crash. So actually raising that sort of floor, core voltage floor will actually improve memory stability on some cards, but it is not memory voltage. This is not the voltage actually being fed to the memory. I think that voltage interacts with, because technically the memory controller is part of the GPU core, that voltage is going to be probably related to some side of the memory system of Vega. You know, it probably like GPU side end, like not the HBM side, but it is somehow related to the memory system. It is not straight memory voltage. It's more the minimum core voltage you can go. Because if I set this to say, let's try 1200, right? then if my theory is correct, if I set that to 1200, we should be seeing 1100 and, well, 1150 on the multimeter. So let's quickly run that, which I don't think my theory is going to be wrong. But I didn't bother to check what it would do at 1200 because I only checked the lower voltages. And we're running Firestrike. Yeah, power consumption is in the 500 watt range now. So let's stabby the card. And would you look at that? Yeah, that's 1.1. Yeah, that's a lot of E-core, isn't it? So let's get out of the stress test before it gets too hot. So basically, this voltage right here, if you're having a problem with getting your core voltage to, like, you can't lower your core voltage below a certain point, it's probably because your memory voltage is set really high. So I personally leave it at 950, but depending on your card, you might need to run it at higher voltage or lower voltage. Really, like, it depends. Again, you know, Silicon Lottery and all that, no two cards are the same. But for my card, I can leave it at 950 and it's perfectly fine. What else is there? Right. The other interesting thing, which I'm not going to demonstrate, is if you actually raise your core voltage, your scores in benchmarks go up. And this seems to be related to some of the new, like AMD is completely reworking their overclocking and clock management with Vega. It's approaching GPU boost levels of obnoxious. As of right now, I'm going to say it's worse than GPU boost because it's kind of broken. Whereas GPU boost is obnoxious, but at least it does exactly what, well, mostly what's written on the box. This currently just kind of spits out random numbers. Yeah, if you set higher core voltages, you get higher scores. I didn't remember to make screenshots of that. It doesn't have that much impact. Ultimately, you know, it, like higher core voltage, it really bumps up the frequency like a couple tens of megahertz. So ultimately, it's like you can measure that there's a performance increase. It's just not really worth like it's not really noticeable, really. Like, yeah, you can test for it, but ultimately, if you're raising the core voltage up that much, you're going to want to bump up the core clock. And your increase in core clock from, like, actually changing the target core clock is going to make a bigger impact on performance than the fact that, you know, the card runs, like, 5 megahertz higher, or on average, 5 megahertz higher at 1200 millivolts than at 1100 millivolts. So yeah, that's another interesting sort of thing with Vega. Your core clock does go up and down depending on what core voltage you set. Don't really know how to feel about that. I kind of find it annoying, but yeah. So yeah, overall, I still haven't done that. I still haven't shown you power consumption, so we'll just dial in those settings that were actually stable for me. Though they weren't like super stable. It was just like the only settings I haven't seen crash today. And I did do this kind of very briefly. Because again, it's like, I'm surprised with how much this doesn't suck. You know, I thought when I was going to start undervolting the card, the performance was going to fall off a cliff. I didn't realize the performance was so bad to start with. Now that I think about it, I don't think I ever ran my Vega card at stock to begin with. Or at least I never paid attention to what the score looks like without maxing out the power slider and seriously cranking up the fan speed. So going into this, I had a lot lower expectations than what I ended up with. But, you know, if you avoid all the traps with Wattman, like this voltage right here, core voltage, which actually, we should be back in here. So, you know, if you avoid all the traps of this voltage lower than V-core, this voltage being whatever the hell you want, HBM clock, you can just set whatever you want. My card can run 1100, which is nice. Max out the power limit. Just always max out the power limit. It just gives you better, it doesn't really change the power consumption that much, as you'll see right now, depending on what you set your core voltage to. Obviously, if I set my core voltage to 1200, which we basically just did when I set the memory voltage to 1200, the memory voltage quotation marks to 1200, because it's really not memory voltage, it's core voltage, but I really don't get that. Like, would it kill them to label things with what they actually freaking are? But anyway, yeah, you know, you set your memory like when I did that 1200 run very briefly, the power consumption was at like 525 watts, and I know from benchmarking this card with seriously like lifted power limits, 600 watts is really easy to hit on this card. So it is really easy to hit on Vega. So yeah, this is actually impressive that the card is getting, like, it's not that far behind my maximum overclocks. I think the highest performance I've ever gotten out of the card on like just raw clock speed attempts was basically, well, it was in the 12,000s, I think maybe even 12,500, but this is already doing 11,500, so that's like 1,000 points over stock, which is about 9% more performance than stock, and it's about 500 points more than Turbo, but I'm pretty sure Turbo actually ends up pulling more power than the Undervolt. So let's just quickly run this. In the custom run, because I did, yeah, 1100, 1587. Yeah, okay, so I configured everything correctly. Now, don't try to just copy my settings. Some cards might be able to run higher, some cards might be able to run lower. Another thing a lot of people don't realize, power supply quality affects overclocking, okay? There's a reason why all of these cards are shipping with, well, they're not really shipping with ridiculously high stock voltage if you think about it, because most Vega 64s will very quickly end up running well below 1 volt just because of the power limit and the terrible cooler. But yeah, and I just realized I have the card on the 200 watt BIOS instead of on the 220. Oh, whatever. that just makes the card look slightly less bad, I guess, at stock. Anyway, here's the, whoop. Right there. So you can see we're okay. So we're going slightly higher than before, but still more or less around 390 at the wall. So yeah. A lot more performance, barely any increase in power consumption. We run the turbo state, which I am right now. Like, I have the BIOS switch on the 200 watt setting, so sorry about that, didn't notice that. That's probably losing me a couple points on the, though technically I can simulate the 220 watt setting by just, well, not really. I don't get why they have to put 2 different BIOSes on the freaking card. It's literally 10% power limit difference. You know, it's like, who cares? Seriously, it's like both of those BIOSes ultimately kind of suck, right? Neither of them is particularly efficient, and the other one, and the less efficient one, isn't particularly fast. So I don't know why they even bothered. It's like, oh yeah, it's a bit like feature creep on motherboards. It's like, oh yeah, we got this and we got that nobody ever uses, but it's there. Yeah, but anyway, this is what turbo looks like. And yeah, you can actually see the power consumption is worse. There. So that's turbo, 430. That's getting you lower performance than with the undervolt and massive HBM overclock. So yeah. That's a bit on undervolting. The thing is, I don't really have any like proper big test results for you here, because ultimately I have no idea how the hell to undervolt, right? It's like like my approach to this was like, okay, so people do this thing called undervolting. What's the actual goal here? Do they just want minimum power consumption? Because I know a trick how to do that. Set core clock to 300 megahertz, V-core to, like whatever is necessary to keep the HBM running, and rock with that, and like whatever. But ultimately, I don't think that's actually what anybody wants to actually do. I mean, yeah, the card would pull like 100 watts maybe, but it would also be horrifically slow. And at that point, you might have, well, like it would have performed like a 1060, and you might as well have bought a 1060 at that point, in my opinion, or a RX 580 if you could find one. Though admittedly, RX 580 would pull a hell of a lot more power than this at 300 megahertz. But yeah, no. So I'm not really sure what most people would consider like a successful undervolt. This really isn't much of an undervolt because if you think about it, the card all on its own runs at like 980 millivolts. I guess on the more powerful BIOS, it would run on like 1 volt. Big deal. So I went from around 1 volt to 0.96 on the back of the card. And yeah, the performance went up. It's pretty much as like it's not far from being completely maxed out in terms of actual performance. Though admittedly, if you're on a water block or something, you can definitely push these cards further than what I just demonstrated. Like that 1200 plus score, you can go well beyond that. Well, not well beyond that, but you can go beyond that on water cooling. But yeah, I'm not sure. It's like, do people like care to go even lower on the undervolting? Like, should I test 950 millivolts or something? Because I don't really see the point. Because ultimately, I can keep bumping down the voltage until the card stops running, and it's like, oh yeah, ultimate undervolt, 500 millivolts. Below that, the transistors don't turn on. Which I think the gate threshold for 14 nanometer is like 100 millivolts or something. So we could go really far down. I don't think the card would be very happy with that, though. So, yeah. But, I guess let's just summarize, right? If you want to undervolt your Vega, put your frequency mode into static. Don't touch P6. Don't change, well, unless you want to match P7 with P6. Like, always have P6 at a lower clock than P7. That's your rule for that one. Right. Then for your core voltage, just set whatever the hell you feel like. Personally, like, 1 volt, I don't know. I really don't know what the hell people set in those settings. Like, how do you decide where do you stop undervolting? That's the problem I see with this. Like, with overclocking, it's easy. The card stops working if you go too far. Here, you can just keep going down, down, down until, like, not sure. This you'll want to set below core voltage unless it causes stability issues, in which case you'll probably just want to set your core voltage higher than your memory voltage anyway, because ultimately what the memory voltage does is it drives up your core voltage. It doesn't affect any of the other VRMs on the card, which I've checked in previous tests on my own. So I was really confused with what that voltage does until very recently when I noticed that it actually drives up your core voltage. So yeah, memory frequency, set whatever you can run. Remember, if your card is going over 80, it might eat into your HBM overclock. I'll just leave that at 950. Your power limit, you'll just want to max that right out. And fan speed, whatever you can tolerate. I can tolerate 2800. To be completely, like, 4900, too much. But up to 3000 really isn't that bad in my opinion, which I think says something about my noise tolerance. It's not that I'm deaf, right? But it's just like, it's a fan. It's not, I don't find it that annoying. So, yeah. Don't set P6 and 7 to same thing. Keep memory voltage below core voltage. Max power limit. Set fan speed to whatever you want. That's pretty much how you tune a Vega for maximum performance. There's not really much else to it. You don't really want to touch the temperature target because, as I said, above 80 degrees, you'll actually, like, you will lose, sometimes you will lose HBM stability. Also, if the HBM gets really hot, like above 80 degrees, it will loosen out its timings. It also loosens its own timings out at a lower temperature, but I haven't managed to catch that one yet. So basically, you don't really want to raise the temperature target because it, like, you can end up just losing stability or performance. So yeah, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave a comment down below if you have any questions or suggestions for how to freaking undervolt, because I don't get it. Like, where do you stop? What else is there? Right, I have a Patreon, a PayPal, and shirts, and there's also the AHOC Junkyard where you can buy stuff that, like, GPUs I want to get rid of that do still work. I'm not trying to sell you my Dead Frontier edition, but, like, you know, there is a GTX 1070 I really kind of want gone at this point. And yeah, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Where's that stop button? Oops, missed it.